Hey there, thanks for tuning into Duckbricks. I'm Chris, and as a quick history lesson, in the early days of LEGO Bionicle, the working title was Boneheads of Voodoo Island. The entire concept of LEGO Bionicle was not Kanohi masks, but instead having to punch the head off of your opponents. As such, we do not really know a ton of details about the Boneheads of Voodoo Island. We have been shown a few prototype models from Christian Faber, creator of Bionicle's private YouTube channel, and honestly, that's about it outside of a couple of sketches until now. Because as you see, just earlier this year, or earlier last year actually, I got a chance to visit and meet the creator of LEGO Bionicle, Christian Faber, in Copenhagen in his offices, and he let me pour through a ton of old LEGO Bionicle documents related to the creation of Bionicle as a theme. And one of those documents was an original story comic for the Boneheads of Voodoo Island, revealing a first glimpse at what the potential story might have been for this alternate theme of Bionicle. I'm so excited to be able to share this with you because this is something that hasn't really ever been shared at all online or whatsoever. It is our chance to be able to see what the early workings of the Bionicle Boneheads story might have been. I can't wait to jump right into the comic itself, so let's go ahead and do this. This is probably the most interesting item so far to me because this is a never seen before story comic for the Boneheads of Voodoo Island. That's right. This got a full-on comic, and you may recognize some of these images and concepts and prototypes from Christian Faber's other videos revealing the Boneheads of Voodoo Island prototypes here emerging from giant canisters. And of course, those are some very recognizable heads if you have been following the prototypes themselves. This was mind-blowing to me. Again, we have so much stuff to cover in this video. I know this is already going to be probably an hour plus long video, so I can't even go into too much detail about every single one of these, but again, feel free to pause the video if you do want to see any of these in detail, and I definitely will try to get as clear pictures as I can of each of these. So if people want to even recreate some of these models, this is the first chance we're even seeing some of them from different angles. So that is so cool to see original comic concepts for the precursors of Bionicle. I want to dive a lot deeper into this because after looking back at my footage of meeting Christian Faber, this is honestly one of the things that really stood out to me. And the reason why is because this hasn't really ever been published, but it shows that the bones, get it, of Bionicle were still there even when Boneheads of Voodoo Island was being developed. Now, this image right here is showcasing the initial pod seed. Bionicle fans will recognize this as one of the first images associated with the Bionicle storyline, where before the canister idea was developed, the idea was that the pieces of the characters would arrive in seeds, and this is something that carried over to Bionicle itself. Of course, the image we know is green, whereas this one is a little more mechanical. It is shaped like a seed, but it almost looks more like a mechanical submarine, which is really interesting, and emerging from the canister are all the different pieces assembling together into the main character of this particular comic. We do not know the name of any of the Boneheads of Voodoo Island characters, nor do we know if they have names other than Axe and Hook and Sword and whatnot, which were the early names that were translated onto the original Bionicle characters. But this one here is pretty interesting because we actually know that some of these are set prototypes, which Christian Faber showed off years ago in one of his early Bionicle videos posted on his channel. Now, those early sets are translated directly into this hand-drawn comic, and I just love the artwork. It would be amazing if Christian Faber was able to scan this in one day, because I definitely feel like this is something that should be shared as a PDF to everyone, and I know that if I ever make a LEGO museum, this is certainly going to get scanned in if Christian Faber is kind enough to donate it to the museum, which he mentioned he would if I ever get the museum up and running. Now here you can see the general idea of the story taking shape. The heads popping off the characters themselves. This was something that LEGO considered in the early development of Bionicle before they got some kid feedback that they weren't really into the idea of ripping the heads off of their characters and giving it to others, which is why they come up with masks. But here you can see them battling the first iterations of the Rahi or mechanical beasts, obviously of Bionicle 2001, but here you can also see a battle going on between two different warriors, where the heads of different warriors are being swapped in and out of the different characters, which seem to be giving them different powers. An early build of what would eventually become the Muwaka and Kane Ra, which apparently has throwbot arms, is seen here, which is really interesting, and I just love taking a closer look at all of these builds because, as you can see, they are directly based off of prototype models. So if somebody were to study the images of this comic, you could probably actually rebuild the characters here. Here it shows that after some sort of battle is broken out, the two different warriors are fighting. One of them has knocked the head off of the other and has placed his head on top of his own, which is a little bit of a crazy concept for a LEGO theme. I'm so curious how the lore of that would have worked. Maybe their consciousnesses are stored in the body and not the head itself, which is how they're able to swap the heads back and forth. Obviously, lots of early ideas going on, but here you can see that initially some of the early explorations for the island that they were living on also had to do with the fact that it was a giant robot. And this next series of images here is something very similar to the artwork that we get for Bionicle 2001, powering up via Kanohi masks, except this time it seems to change the entire shape of your body, where the humanoid character has now been transformed into this massive hulking brute with treads for legs, a whipping weapon, and yes, this is the prototype that we saw in Christian Faber's early Boneheads of Voodoo Island prototype model showcase, where you could actually see this was one of the motorized models. It rolled around on the treads and had this motorized whipping weapon, so it's really cool being able to actually see that in the comic itself. Now you can see it facing off against one of the other characters, which we also saw as a prototype. This is one that primarily used the metal green components introduced for LEGO Technic, walking on two legs, similar to the walking AT-ATs or even something like the Boxor we got from Bionicle, except that one wasn't motorized. And there, a ferocious battle seems to have broken out. I can't really quite tell what the text is saying. I don't even think that's English. I think they were just scribbling down words that the characters might be saying in a language of their own. And then comes some new characters that we haven't even seen in brick-built form, but maybe existed as prototypes on the shelves of the designers. Swooping in from above is some sort of a bird with a claw here. On the far right-hand side, it is an orange-colored bird. I guess that would eventually become what would become the Nui Rama and the Kahu bird and the Gecko bird later on in Bionicle's story, but it's really cool seeing this early build for it because, again, if you study these images well enough, you might be able to create these as mocks, and I think that would be so cool. And then, somewhat strangely, erupting from the sand right after the bird attacked and I guess flies away, there was some sort of a Dune-esque sandworm rising up from the ground. It seems that Christian Faber and the folks behind the early ideas of Bionicle were really trying to mix and match different types of kind of sci-fi concepts and remote creatures and all sorts of different types of fantasy elements blending into the mythology of Boneheads of Voodoo Island, and here you can see them facing off against the wildlife of the island itself. It seems the main character would actually change shape throughout the course of the story, again by putting on different heads. The entire shape of the body would change, which I guess would make it a little bit confusing for viewers trying to understand which characters are what, but it is a really interesting concept having multiple sets being based off of the same character, just in different forms. On this comic page, you can see a look at some of the different masks created, or I guess the heads created for Boneheads of Voodoo Island, as well as a massive wheeled vehicle, which for whatever reason reminds me of the Megacore Magnetizer from LEGO Classic Space, but obviously is a full-on piloted Technic vehicle, which is just so cool. I love the amount of detail that went into that vehicle, and there you can see the backside of the pilot itself, which also seems to be some sort of incredibly complex Technic-built creature, which again, would be so cool if Christian Faber still had any old videos of these prototypes. That would absolutely blow my mind, because I know myself and a ton of other people are working on recreating them. Here's that final image where it seems that their battle is broken out between the wheeled vehicle and the main character. I guess it either sprouted wings or maybe the bird has come back. It's a little hard to follow what exactly is going on in the pages of this comic, but it was so cool being able to see the early story concept for what would become Bionicle. Again, these pages were the precursors of the Bionicle story itself, as they were just conceptualizing very early ideas, and I think that this is one of the coolest things I was shown, and something I felt dedicated its own video, especially because I haven't seen that much discussion about it after the video came out, albeit there was a ton of information there, and that's why I wanted to make this its own separate video. Alright, and with that, we have summed up our look at the Boneheads of Voodoo Island story comic. Let me know down in the comments below, what do you think of the story? Do you like it? Do you like the illustrations? And are you curious to see what Bionicle could have evolved into if they chose to stick with this aesthetic? I know I am. I hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you so much for tuning into Duck Bricks. Be sure to like and subscribe for even more LEGO news, reviews, discussion, and analyses coming your way very soon. And bye for now.